Hey guys, welcome back to Educator Fresh. Solomon, still talking about biology. I want to address the issue of sense organs today. This is going to be a video in a series on coordination and control. So we will be addressing receptor cells and their properties today, and then later we shall be handling the sense organs. A receptor is a cell or tissue that can transform any form of energy into an action potential. When we talk about energy, we are talking about electrical, chemical, mechanical, radiant energy. Mechanical can be pressure, but any form of energy that it transforms into an action potential that we call an impulse. We have a video on that. You can feel free to like it. Receptors come in very many shapes or sizes. But basically any cell that can transform something that is external or internal into an impulse or via a neuron is going to be called a receptor cell. Some of the properties that they have, we have transduction, we have sensitivity, we have adaptation, we have inhibition, and we have precision. In that picture, you have a few examples of sense organ receptors. We have the rods and the cones, we have hearing, then we have the smell, the olfactory lobes, we have the taste buds, we have the mesenous corpuscles, and we shall be getting to know more. But let's talk about the properties of receptor cells. The first one we are going to address is transduction. Transduction is the ability of a receptor cell to change physical stimuli into an electrical stimuli. A picture I have here is of how a chemical signal is going to be converted into an instruction inside the cell, and this particularly is the second messenger pathway. So we have a ligand attaching on a receptor, releasing the GDP molecule into GTP. GTP attaches on adenyl cyclase, and then adenyl cyclase is going to convert ATP into cyclic AMP, which will activate other protein kinases. So that is one way to explain transduction. Something came as a chemical, it attaches itself on this particular cell on a receptor, and it set off a series of reactions that became a stimuli. But in this case, we want to talk about cells that convert any stimuli into an electrical stimuli called an impulse, or what we are going to be commonly calling an action potential. The ability of a cell to do that is what we call transduction. So all receptor cells are able to transduce electrical physical stimuli into electrical stimuli. The second property is sensitivity. All receptor cells are sensitive even to the slightest change in their environment. Rod cells, for example, in the eye, are capable of recognizing light in the least quantity available, and they are able to respond to that light. So those are the first two. The third one we can talk about is sensory adaptation. This is a phenomenon in which the body adjusts to external stimuli over time. In other words, if you enter a room and there is like the ticking of a clock, your body has the ability over time to filter out that repetitive information and then edit it. According to Harris, says sensory adaptation occurs when receptors reduce their responsiveness to a stimulus after repeated or continuous exposure. In other words, when you've been exposed to something for a very long time, your body eventually learns how to filter that information out. This form of adaptation is found in all the five senses. You can enter a room and there's like something that is very obvious, maybe a dot, maybe a ball on the wall, a picture on the wall. But after some time, because it's not important, your eyes begin to filter out that information and put it with background information. Prolonged exposure to certain tastes can make certain tastes become bland to our taste buds. So your taste buds can adapt. The first time you eat chili, it is going to be very hot. But over time, your taste buds are going to adapt to it. Smell, if you're exposed to a strong smell, like if you go to a toilet that has a very strong smell, and for some reason you have to stay there for an extended time, after some time the sense of smell gradually becomes less sensitive, and eventually you may not even be able to detect that sense. So that is what we call adaptation. We have two types of receptors. We have what we call the phasic receptors, and we have the tonic receptors. The phasic receptors adapt quickly to stimuli, and then the tonic receptors adapt slowly. We are going to come back to this a bit later. I want to bring it back and explain it more in detail. What are the advantages of adaptation? The first advantage of adaptation is it provides precise information to animals about changes. What this means is there are going to be scenarios where you have to focus on something and filter out all the other excess information. Adaptation is very important in such a scenario. It helps you to focus because you don't have to pay attention to every detail around you. Your body has an inbuilt system that removes all the other excesses, all the other wastes. It allows the nervous system to ignore useless stimuli. If you're in a room and you're doing an exam, you don't want to be noticing what is on the other person's desk. You don't want to be noticing what is on the ceiling. So naturally, your body knows, your receptors know how to filter out that information. That's a property that all receptors have. Some may adapt slowly, others may adapt quickly, but at the end of the day, all of them have the ability to adapt. It also prevents overloading of the brain because the brain has to process information at very fast speeds. So being able to filter out information that is not important, information that is noise, information that is repetitive, helps the brain to focus on that information which it deems important. I also have this is how magicians exploit the blind spot. You want to know that. The threshold. All receptors, as another property, all receptors have a threshold. In other words, the level at which their generator potential, I'm going to talk about it later, the level at which a generator potential is going to become an action potential. All receptors have varying thresholds, but they have thresholds. In other words, they can be excited, but for them to actually fire an impulse, they are going to need to be excited to a certain degree of stimulation. So when it comes to this, the magnitude of stimulation of a receptor is going to be directly proportional to the intensity of stimulation until saturation. In other words, until the threshold is exceeded, the magnitude of stimulation that the stimulus is bringing is going to be directly proportional to the stimulation, which we are going to call the generator potential. And unless the generator potential exceeds the threshold, an action potential will not be fired. So we are saying different cells may have different thresholds, like the rods and the cones. We are going to see them in the eye. The rods have really low threshold levels, but the cones have high threshold levels. One of the reasons why rods can see in dim light and dark light is because they have low threshold levels, but cones can only see light, can only see color, perceive light when they have high threshold, when they receive high stimulation, because they have a high threshold level. The value of the threshold must be reached for an action potential to be generated. Let's talk about this thing called the generator potential. All receptors, when they are stimulated, create a generator potential. If you must go back, if you don't know what a generator potential is, you'll have to go back and watch that video where we talked about an impulse and how it's generated. And a generator potential is the magnitude of the generator potential is directly proportional to the strength of the stimulus applied to the receptor. When it exceeds the threshold value, an action potential is generated. When the generator potential exceeds the threshold value, an action potential is generated. Now, any increase in the magnitude of the depolarization results into an increased frequency of the action potential. And this is very important, that once the threshold level is reached, it does not matter. I think I'll put in a picture on that at this point. It does not matter how big the stimulus is, the action potential is not going to increase. What is going to increase is how many action potentials are going to be fired in that period of time. Once the threshold value is exceeded, the frequency of the action potential increases, but the action potential itself cannot increase because it is set at a pattern level. The rate of depolarization cannot increase. What increases is the frequency with which action potentials are going to be fired. Therefore, a weak stimulus results into a small generator potential and a slow impulse frequency, but a stronger stimulus will produce a larger generator potential and a faster impulse frequency. So some of the differences that we can talk about, we have the generator potential comes from a specific stimulus. Depolarization will come from a specific stimulus, but we know that depolarization for the action potential can come from neurotransmitters as well, like adrenaline, like acetylcholine. Those things can also, glutamate, can also cause depolarization and sometimes even hyperpolarization. The generator potential is proportional to the size of the stimulus. If the stimulus is big, the generator potential is going to be big. If the stimulus is small, the generator potential is going to be small. However, the action potential follows the all or nothing law. Either the threshold is going to be exceeded or an action potential will not be fired. And once the threshold is exceeded, the action potential will be fired. It does not matter if it exceeds it by 1 or by 10. Once the threshold level is exceeded, the depolarization, which causes the action potential, is going to be fired. That's all or nothing principle, the all or nothing law. You either reach it or you don't get it. You either reach the threshold where you exceed it, or you will not reach. You will not have an action potential. But once you exceed the threshold, you will have an equal action potential for all different sizes of the stimulus. So we've been talking about the threshold level, that all receptor cells have threshold levels that they follow. Another property that we can talk about is spontaneous activity. Some receptor cells have the ability to form nerve impulses in sensory neurons even without being stimulated. Why? This is important because it increases sensitivity. Because sometimes the stimulus is going to come, but it's going to be really weak. So for the cells to be able to already have an impulse that has been generated, a depolarization that is already existing, we can be sure that we are going to actually have a small stimulus can actually generate an action potential. So any slight change in the intensity of the stimulus adds onto the already existing potential in the receptor, and it produces a change in the frequency of the impulses along the sensory neuron. Now, another character that we can talk about here is inhibition and precision. Receptor cells can be stopped from firing impulses by special synaptic connections. So there are synaptic connections that are inhibitory. We talked about them in the previous video called the inhibitory postsynaptic potentials. And then others are excitatory. So receptor cells actually are controlled. While they can receive the information, not all the information necessarily is going to be carried to the next, to the motor neuron or to the sensory neuron, depending on what neuron they are attached to. We are going to see the classification of the receptor cells. Certain impulses can only be transmitted only when they are required. Yeah, certain impulses can only be transmitted when they are required. That is very important. And then precision, the ability to transmit the information precisely without it being altered, because the information is going to be carried along the neuron. That information can be carried just the way it is required. In the next video, we are going to be talking about the classification of receptor cells. Thank you for watching. Have a good day. Please like and subscribe.